Righty. Let's do the old testy Rooney. Test the Roros. Okay, volume test. Check it out, check it out. Okay, cool. We're good. We're good for the volume. So, what the heck was that? That's weird. Anyways, we're good. What is going on? Actually, I want to double check. I want to make sure that we're not lagging. If we're lagging, I'm gonna remove one of my streams because I'm streaming on 3 different platforms right now. So if I'm lagging too much, test the Roros. Okay, volume test. Check it out, check it out. Okay. Yeah, that's too much. That's too much lag for me. So I'm gonna remove one stream. And then hopefully that'll clear up the lag. I normally don't care. Like if you guys see my last videos, I'm like, who cares? But today I care. Check it out, check it out. I decided that I cared. I just decided. We're good. Streaming on 3 different platforms right now. So if I'm lagging too much. Looks like I'm good. Or better at least. I don't know about good. You know, better. I'll probably just have to stick with that. Better than it was. Alright, so as you guys can tell from the title, this one's a little bit clickbait. A little bit of a clickbait. Not really, because it is factual. But it's also a slightly misleading, you know, because you might be inclined to think, okay, your delusion saved your life. Okay, so you're thinking about like, you know, like psychosis type stuff, you know, or negative delusions. No, those kind of delusions fuck my life up. And if you don't know and you're new to my channel, then just a little preface, a little backstory on me before I got onto here. I'm from a very damaged space. Okay, so a lot of the things that I've experienced in the past come from this damaged space, come from negative delusions, you know, negative, damaged kind of mindset. Of course, I'm sure we all been through some form of damage, some form of mental instability, right? So it's nothing new to a lot of people. You know, it's definitely something that we experience in life at varying degrees. You know, some of us experience it a little bit more on an extreme level, and others may experience it on a less extreme level. So I'm not sure what's going on here. Looks like I'm freaking lagging still. So I don't know, I really don't know what's causing my lag, because my bars are good. Everything seems to be good, but it's probably the network, the internet connection. But how's the audio? You guys can hear me? If anyone's in the chat right now, can you guys hear me, or is it trash? Oh, be careful. There's an iron there. It might still be hot. I can hear myself clearly on YouTube. That's all that matters to me right now. If it's not working on Twitch, then I'll go back and I'll check it after. Otherwise, unless someone comments, you know, in the next few minutes. But either way, we'll just make do with what we have right now. So now it looks like we're clearing up in terms of connection, so that's pretty good. So, you know, coming from this delusional damage type of space, right? I've faced a lot of negative delusions in my past, faced a lot of negative ideas and pessimistic type thinking. I'd probably consider myself a realist back then, you know, but definitely looking back now from the position I'm in now, it's more of a pessimistic mindset rather than a realistic mindset. There's a very stark difference between the two. But if you've been in a pessimistic mindset, you already know. You more see it. When you're in that mindset, you more think that you're being realistic rather than pessimistic. You're like, that's just life, you know? But it's really not life. Life is what you make it, as people say. So, one thing that helped me when I was in this delusional space, right? Having this delusional mindset about the world was flipping it on its ass. So instead of being delusional about the negative things that I experienced, right, and pushing it into more of an extreme on that side, I was more delusional about, like, still delusional about my negative experiences. But instead, I flipped it on its ass and I decided to make myself delusional in a more positive way. To be like, well, you know what? Maybe this XYZ is negative, but flipping it on its ass and just convincing myself that it was actually for the better. And one of the massive things that really I used to do was, like, let's say you're in a negative situation, right? And you're going through shit. You'd normally be more inclined to think, okay, you know, things are going down, you know, I'm going through some shit. And then you'd be more inclined to think, okay, I'm on a downward spiral. But then you would eventually get out of it anyway. So it doesn't really matter. It didn't really matter until, like, you were in the thing, right? But I like to flip that on its ass. And one thing that massively helped me was, like, being like, okay, instead of thinking I'm in a downward spiral, I'd be like, you know what, actually, this is just me healing and letting go of whatever I need to do so I can actually clear it and get rid of it in my reality. And it took practice, because at first I was like, bro, like, no, I'm on a down, I'm going through some shit. I'm downward spiraling, you know? And it's so easy to fall into that trap, especially if you're used to being pessimistic. But really flipping it on its ass and being like, even when reality shows you, that's why I write a delusion. Because definition of a delusion is even when you're shown facts that prove otherwise, you still stay strong in whatever you're delusional about, right? So I had to stay strong, even though my reality would show me, actually, no, you're not delusional, you are on a downward spiral. Or no, you're not, no, you are delusional, you are on a downward spiral. You shouldn't think like that. But then I would be like, no, I don't give a fuck if my reality shows me that I'm in a downward spiral or that things are turning to shit. I'm just going to fully convince myself and fully believe that everything's turning out for the better. And it took freaking time after time after time. A lot of times I would catch myself falling back into that old thought pattern. I would find myself falling back into that old way of being. And I'd be like, okay, you know, maybe I am going through this X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I might be going through it, but bitch, doesn't mean that I'm not going to overcome that shit, you know what I mean? And it's so easy to fall back into that mental trap. And that's why people say you are your own worst enemy. Because if you continue to think, okay, yeah, I'm downward spiraling, of course you're going to see the results of that in your reality, and you're only going to be convinced of whatever you believe. So I decided to convince myself of anything else that I wanted to. And then I started to have fun with it. I started to have even more fun. Where even certain situations where I'd naturally be inclined to be like, you know what? No, that was not right. That wasn't the thing to do. That wasn't the XYZ. I'd turn around and I'd be like, you know what? No, actually, that was the thing to do. That was the XYZ. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't know this, and this about myself. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't know this, and that about myself. Like, so for, like, what am I saying? 'Cause, like, you know, I hear some people be like, okay, that's really vague. Like, give me an example, a proper example of that. And it's like, for an example, like, let's say you had an argument, right? Maybe you're trying to stop arguing. Maybe you're trying to get out of a frustrating, argumentative space. And then all of a sudden, you end up having that argument, right? And then you turn around, you're like, oh no, I did. Oh my gosh, see, I've been trying to get out of an argumentative space. I've been trying to get out of this negative space. And look, I just got pulled back into this argumentative space. I'll turn around, I'll flip it in any way that I can. Whatever comes to my mind at first, you know, whatever fits perfectly. So like, for example, I'll turn around and be like, you know what? No, actually, me arguing in that situation was actually beneficial for me because it actually helped me to see where I don't let things stand and where my boundaries are at, and it allows me to actually see how far I can push myself before I get to that limit. You know, that's a little bit of a dumb example because it's more realistic and less delusional, right? But you kind of get the idea where I'm going with this. It's just convincing yourself that everything is working out for the better regardless of what your reality shows you, because that's really the best way that helped me, and it saved my life. Like I said in the title, you know, it saved my life and stopped me from being in that constant negative space and constantly seeing negative examples in my reality that, yeah, I'm going through this shit. Yeah, I'm failing. You know, that fucking word. Like, I don't even see that in my reality anymore. And if I do, I try to eliminate that shit as soon as possible. So if I'm seeing something in my reality that makes me feel like, oh, I failed, or oh, I let myself down, oh, I went back on something that I knew that I shouldn't have done, I'm like, bitch, no. Even if it was a mistake, that was the right thing to do because that helped me to actually know what to do and what not to do. Or bitch, no, that wasn't a mistake at all. That was the right thing because that was actually the necessary thing that I needed to say. Otherwise that person wouldn't have backed off. Like I remember there was this one time, like not long ago, I had this moment where I felt like I'd kind of caved, and because I'm not very emotional as I used to be, and then I found myself one day looking at myself and I was like, that seemed really emotional. That seemed like more emotional compared and closer to the person that I used to be in terms of my emotions. And then started feeling guilty about it, and then started to think to myself, well, actually, no, that wasn't me being emotional. Yeah, I did get upset. Yeah, I got emotional, but it wasn't in that way. It was more a situation for me to actually show that this is a boundary and this does not need to be crossed. And actually me saying that and me breaking out and being emotional per se actually is going to help the situation, and it's actually going to stop this situation from hurting me in the future, because now people are going to look at me and be like, you know what, I don't want to go into that area and I don't want to disturb this person's peace, and I don't want this person to feel like that again. And then I even had that other thought like coming in like, no, you should feel guilty, like that was a bad thing to do. And yeah, I would still acknowledge both sides, like, yeah, it probably was a bad thing to do. I don't want to do that again. But I'm also like, in my head, I'm like, but also it was necessary for this situation because it led to this point in order for me to even get to that emotional point. And now what happened like a few days later? This is like a real example, by the way, guys. What happened a few days later? The same people who I thought that I was doing dirty by, that I was doing wrong by, came and apologized to me. They came and said, look, sorry for the other day, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting here like, see, that's the power of your belief, your faith, belief, and imagination. Because if I hadn't have believed that, I probably would have experienced another thing in my reality. They probably wouldn't have apologized for me. They'd probably turn around and be like, oh, or they'd probably give me a dirty look. They probably wouldn't even say anything. You know what I mean? Maybe they'll just completely avoid me. Maybe they'll just completely block me out of their life. Who knows? What I do know is that they didn't, and they actually apologized to me, and they actually literally kept going on about how it was their fault in the situation and that they shouldn't have done X, Y, and Z. And I was like, see, that's how I know. And I knew that when I was doing that, because I knew that in order for me to actually overcome all of that and to get out of that frustrating emotion of battling between, okay, I shouldn't have done that, I should have done that, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have done that, I just had to convince myself that it was necessary. I just had to convince myself that it was the right thing to do. And that's just a small example. you know, and obviously within reason. Like, I'm not telling people to go do shitty things to people and then convince themselves that it was right. That's called narcissism. You know what I mean? And that's a whole different story. I'm talking about people who don't do that, and then it happens like once in a blue moon, and then you decide to convince yourself. Maybe you felt like it was a mistake. You know, maybe you felt like that you're a bad person. Maybe you felt like your life has got to making a turn for the worse, whatever it was. But not for people who go through this on a regular basis. Like, let's say you constantly lash out at people and then you're constantly convincing yourself that it was the right thing to do. Like, I don't know, maybe for you that might help. I don't know, you have to tell me if you're a narcissist like that, you know, and if you constantly break out and lash out at people, you know, that'll be interesting. I'm genuinely curious. So, you know, anybody who, you know, you may not think you're a narcissist, but anybody who lashes out regularly like that, love to hear your opinion, love to hear your thoughts on that, and whether or not that is actually something that helped you, you know, get out of that narcissistic trait of constantly lashing out, constantly being emotional. It might help, but I'm not going to sit here and say it will, because I don't want to sit here and encourage people to have bad behavior and to justify their own negative behaviors. You know what I mean? If it's negative, it's negative. If you ain't shit, you ain't shit. You know what I mean? If you're toxic and you constantly lash out at people like they're the toxic one, you're probably the toxic one. You know what I mean? But on the flip side, if you're like me, where you don't even do that, you're actually very, very positive a lot of the time. You're very, very respectful. You try to keep the peace as much as you can, where you can, you know, where it's reasonable, of course, without over extending your own boundary, right? And then once in a blue moon you do that. You know, this is more for you guys, because I don't want to put it out there and then a whole bunch of narcissistic people come back to my video, or a whole bunch of people who dated narcissistic people come back to my video, and then they'd be like, my partner said that you said X, Y, and Z, and this is what made them constantly like lash out at me, and they think that they're doing the right thing. No. I don't want to sit there and do that to people. You know what I mean? Fuck that shit. That's real toxic. But yeah, and this can take into many different areas, you know, just like those are just small examples. Those are just like some little examples for people. If you guys need like an idea of how to kind of frame it in your mind and how to see things, because I really want people to kind of get to that perspective so that they can create that mentality for themselves, and you can be convicted and not have to worry about looking for external validation and worry about, you know, oh my gosh, should I do the right thing? And like, that's like Christian mentality. So reason why I say it's Christian mentality is because you now feel like you have to go repent. You have to feel like you have to go be forgiven for a mistake that you made, and so on and so forth. And so you're like on your knees spiritually, like begging for forgiveness from the external world, aka looking for validation. Be like, did I do the right thing, or was that the wrong thing to do? You know, whatever the case may be. It doesn't really matter. Either way, you're in that state of being, of feeling guilty, of feeling like you need to repent, or feeling like you need to ask for forgiveness or validation. So that's why I say it's a Christian type of mentality. And I'm saying that from experience. I grew up in a Christian family. So anybody who thinks I don't know what I'm talking about, like, I know from experience. Only time I was going through that was when I was still lost into Christian mentality, you know, and still thinking in my mind that there was some kind of God out there that had to save me and absolve me of my own sins, when you are supposed to be able to absolve yourself of your own sins. Which brings me into my next part of the video, which is that, you know, people who look for external validation, that's another form of it as well, because you're trying to get other people to validate your own delusion. So in your mind, you're like, okay, if someone else says that this was the right thing to do, then now I can go ahead and convince myself that this was the right thing to do, as opposed to just allowing yourself to convince yourself that you did it for the best reason that you could in that moment. You know what I mean? So you did the best that you could with the tools that you had, type shit. So, you know, when you're in that validation space, you're not going to ever be able to validate yourself, because you're constantly relying on an external source for that validation. You're constantly relying on people, places, and things to validate you and show you, oh yeah, actually, no, you were right. Or, oh no, you were wrong. I wonder if I can change my settings while I'm live. See if this will help with my lag. Because my computer's a bit jittery right now. And I don't like it, babes. Encoding, audio encoder, video encoder, a faster encoder preset. So let's go faster. Okay, how's that? Wonder if that did anything. I don't think it did. So yeah, when you do look for that external validation, like I was saying, you're just looking for a mental crutch. And so you're not actually being able to physically, or not physically, spiritually support yourself. You know, you're not able to spiritually support yourself. Oh, wait. My bad. I just made it worse. Now I had to make it better. It said faster encoding preset, so I clicked on fast, and then I realized no, that was actually the one that takes up more CPU. So it's gonna make my shit slower. So now it should be a little bit better. But yeah, you know, when you have to look for that external validation, you're not able to spiritually hold yourself up in the spiritual realm. You're not able to spiritually support yourself. And so you're just constantly looking for other people to feed you what you need, which is you need some form of support or some form of strength. So when you're looking for validation, like, oh, you know, did I do that right thing? Or you constantly have to go ask other people before you actually do something, or before you actually make up your mind about something, then you're only ever going to be able to do that until you actually get yourself out of that cycle. Because I used to be like that so bad. I used to be like constantly looking for external validation, constantly feeling like that I needed somebody else's second opinion in order to validate my own opinion, which wasn't an opinion at all. Because if you have to ask someone else for their opinion on your opinion, you're actually using them to formulate your own opinion. You're not actually formulating your own opinion. You know what I mean? So, and that's what leads people to have lazy minds, and then you probably struggle to think, probably struggle to remember. Your mind starts deteriorating. You start losing brain cells. And you might even eventually start to like feel like you might even want to die, or all types of shit, because you're not actually supporting yourself spiritually. And then things bend into from the mental into the physical. So if you're not supporting yourself spiritually, how do you expect to be able to support yourself physically? Eventually your body's going to follow suit, and your body's going to be like, bitch, I don't even want to support myself physically, because mentally you stop supporting yourself. You know what I mean? And that's why it leads people to end up like getting all types of shit, you know, all types of mental stuff that kind of causes their mentality and their brain to deteriorate at a faster rate, and then you end up aging quicker, you know, all kinds of shit. And I'm saying this from experience. I've freaking been there. Like, I'm literally at the stage right now where I'm starting to notice myself looking younger. Actually, if you watch one of my videos, I wrote, it was a testimony video. I think it was my last testimony. I can't remember what it's called, but it has testimony in it. So if you go on my channel, click on live, then click on the search bar, you can search up testimony. Or if you just type up my name, MyStar, and search up testimony, you should be able to find the video eventually. Search bar on YouTube is not as helpful. If you just go directly to my channel, it'll probably be better. So in that video, I actually showed photos of myself about a year and a half ago or a year ago. And you can literally visibly see the difference of back then. And I was younger. And nowadays, I even compared myself. I put the photo right next to myself, and you could actually see that I physically looked older. And it wasn't just the beard, because I had a beard, full beard back then, overgrown. It wasn't just the beard. It was also the mentality that I was in and the fact that I wasn't supporting myself mentally. And so the fact that now I'm able to support myself more mentally and I'm able to make up my own mind and I'm not reliant on external validation. I'm reliant on my own validation. So if I want to validate myself, I'm validating myself with my own delusions. You know what I mean? And that causes me to actually start to nourish myself spiritually, you know, and so I nourish my own body physically as well. And now look at me. You probably think that I look like 20 years old, right? I don't know, maybe that's a little bit extreme. You probably think I'm like pretty early 20s. I'm 25 this year. I'm 25 in about a month. So, you know, but if you look at my last year's photo, then a year and a half ago, you can actually see that I was visibly older. And that was all due to the mental space that I was in, which allowed me to consume and act in certain ways that caused me to look older as well. You know, because people will be like, oh, well, it's probably because you were eating something bad, or it's probably because you weren't exercising, or it's probably, yeah, but it came from the mental. Because in order for me to not do all that stuff, I had to mentally be in a certain space first. You know, I had to spiritually be in a certain space before I actually jumped into those energies physically. So either or, it doesn't matter which way you look at it, it's always going to take you back to that spiritual and that mental, and you need to get that right before you get anything right. So that's why a lot of people struggle trying to change their life, because they're not changing their mind. And you're constantly looking for external things. So you're like, oh, I really need this validation. Oh, I really need someone to tell me what to do. Oh, I really need someone to help me, blah, blah, blah. Like when you realize that you don't need any of that, you can provide it for yourself. You can be your own parent. You can be your own brother. You can be your own sister. You can be your own support. You can be your own partner. You can be your own anything. Obviously, you can't provide those things physically. You can't physically be your own parent. You can't physically be your own partner. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's about a spiritual and a mental game. So when you're able to do it in the mental and the spiritual, bitch, you'll be on your freaking way and you'll be looking a lot better and you'll be feeling a lot better and you'll be acting a lot better and you won't be freaking lost in your mind thinking that you need to do X, Y, and Z just to get to this point and that point, when in actuality, you may not need to do any of that. You may just need to fucking get your mind right, babes. Get your fucking spirit and your mind right. And then boom, you'll be on your way. So, like, what was I going to say? Yeah, when you're in that space of wanting mental validation, that is a form of weakness. That is what it means to be weak, actually, in a realistic sense. If we're looking at it realistically, that is what it means to be weak, because you are constantly relying on someone else, relying on something else to constantly push you up and support you, you know, instead of realizing that you can just validate yourself. You can just give your own delusions. You can just tell yourself that everything's turning out okay. You can just blah, blah, blah. You know, it doesn't matter which way things are turning out. You can always pull yourself back out of that. You don't actually need anything externally. And when you do feel like you need something externally, in some way, shape, or form, you might be lost. You might be lost into like needing and wanting and craving and reaching, you know, for, or searching, you know, all types of shit that's involving you having to go out and grab something rather than realizing that you have everything within you, you know, like it says in the Bible. It's like that Bible verse, the kingdom of God is within you, you know. So if you don't realize that, you'll constantly feel like you need to go to this person, that priest, that pastor, that reader, and that's your way of connecting to God. But if you realize that everybody has a connection, regardless of if you realize it or not, you'll know that you can take yourself to that space naturally without anyone's help. So for me, you know, that's how I pretty much saved my life and got myself out of a depressive state, got myself out of a suicidal state of being, and stopped myself from actually feeling like I didn't even want to live. Because I was like, you know what? If I'm acting more delusional, if I'm convincing myself that things like lucky girl syndrome, if you guys ever heard of that, it's like a kind of trend that's going on like in the manifestation spiritual-esque community right now, where they convince themselves that everything's happening for them. And I wouldn't advise convincing yourself everything's happening for you, though, because if you watch my other video, expectation is the killer of joy, I think it is. Something like that, something along the lines where I'm talking about expectation. You'll know that when you put an expectation like that, like things are happening for you, you're more likely to be disappointed when things don't happen for you. You know what I mean? But you can also kind of turn it around. Even then, you can still be like, you know what, even though, yeah, things might not be happening for me right now visibly, you can get into that mindset again and go deeper into that delusion and be like, you know what, but that's the real reason why this is happening. It's because it's actually all happening for me. It's all working out for me in the end. So either or, either way, you can still convince yourself and be delulu like that. It's up to you how you want to go about it. Personally, I don't even want to set myself up for the disappointment, so I'm not going to set myself up for the expectation. You know what I mean? So I'd rather just convince myself that, like, in the moment, oh, this is happening for me, this is happening because X, Y, and Z. But for me to sit there and be like, everything's happening for me, that's where I kind of draw the line, because I'm like, no, I don't want to set myself up for disappointment, because if something doesn't happen for me, bitch might turn around and get disappointed, get upset, and then I have to deal with all that energy and have to delulu myself out of that, and I only want to delulu myself out of stuff that I need to delulu myself out of, so I'm not going to sit there and make things for me to be delulu about, you know what I mean? Because now you're just creating a problem that doesn't necessarily need to be there. But each to their own, you know what I mean? If you want to do that, by all means, everyone has their own path, everyone has their own journey, and that's the beauty of life, If you just convince yourself, not even convince yourself, if you just know that, then you won't be so frustrated about other people doing their own thing and you doing your own thing. And sometimes that might clash, and other times it might not even agree at all. It might be completely opposite directions. But that everyone's on their own journey and everyone's got their own opinion, and your journey will lead you to where you need to go, and their journey will lead them where they need to go. And that's all that matters to me. I could care less of what you're using in order to get there, how you need to get there, how you don't need to get there. None of that is my freaking business. My business is whatever I make my business, and that's usually stuff that's actually my business. Or if someone else makes it my business, then in which case, that's a different story. Or if it already is my business, but other than that, like, I don't like to delve too deep into other people's journeys and what other people have done, or need to do, or, whether I think that's right for them based on my own subjective journey, because my journey is going to look completely different to the person on the other side of the world. Their journey may look completely different to someone who they literally live next door to. For one person, they might have a journey and they might really need to learn what it's like to live in a freaking huge ass mansion. For me, I don't even really have the desire to live in a mansion unless I had like a maid or some shit. And even then, like, the idea of a mansion is not entirely appealing to me. I'm more of a mindset where I would rather have, my necessities, have what I need. X, Y, Z. D. And that'll allow me to be able to sustain myself when I need to sustain myself. But getting a mansion, in my mind, that kind of seems more work than it's worth. But for another person, that may not be the case. They may really want a mansion and they may really need to experience what it's like to have a mansion. So you have to kind of look at things like objectively in that way. Because if you look at it too subjectively, you'll start to think to yourself, nobody needs to live in a mansion because that is greedy. And you may be right, it may be greedy, but that doesn't mean nobody needs to live in there. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean that nobody needs to experience what it's like to live in one. You know what I mean? So that's a whole different story, and I'd rather just keep my business out of somebody else's life and not have to delve into bullshit like that. So, you know, let me see, actually, I wonder if anyone has any questions or anything else to add to the situation. Maybe you guys have your own testimony, your own anecdotal experience from this situation. If not, I'll just hop off and then I'll go on my merry way, because I think that's a pretty good end to my video. I feel like I've elaborated on my points enough, and I'm satisfied with how this went. And then, yeah. Also, oh shit, don't mind me, guys. We are currently in Gemini Moon. Just about to fully go into Gemini Moon. Oh, whoopsie. It's about to fully go into Gemini Moon. And so people just want to talk right now. People might be wanting to talk a whole bunch of shit.